Now, the rest of the story. Once upon a time in the town of Brookline, Massachusetts, in a second-floor apartment overlooking Harvard Street, there lived two girls, one of them Jacqueline, who was 13, and her sister Barbara, who was only 9. Now, to see them walking down the street together, one might have imagined that Jacqueline, who was obviously older, looked after the younger sister. But it was the other way around, for Jacqueline, learning disabled from birth, while appearing completely normal and healthy at first glance, would forever have the mind of a child. And thus was woven the tapestry of a poignant relationship, the threads of which often mismatched and sometimes unraveled. For you see, it was Barbara, it was the younger sister, it was the so-called normal one who felt left out, comparatively neglected, who envied the special treatment and the special attention that her parents gave to Jacqueline. Indeed, while Barbara was no less loved, she was sometimes deprived of birthday parties because Jacqueline never had one, of socializing with friends because Jacqueline had no friends. In this way did Barbara share equally in those things which her sister did not have, while missing out on the things that she did have. But one day, there came into the lives of Jacqueline and Barbara somebody magical. It was her gift to them that comprises the rest of the story. Elizabeth Dorothews was a seamstress by trade, an elderly eccentric, lived in a Brookline boarding house, but who came to work for the family on Harvard Street. To the children, she was simply Dodie, part Mary Poppins, part Mother Goose, at once very old and very young. She started out mending clothing and making dresses, and yet in no time was babysitting the sisters when their parents were away. And what stories she could tell, tales in which were concealed her own gentle philosophy and boundless wisdom. It was Dodie who taught Jacqueline and Barbara to pray each night before going to sleep. In fact, the very first Bible stories that the girls ever heard, they heard from Dodie. And so it was that two troubled children came to love a stranger who became a second mother. And something more, ever so slowly, ever so surely, the hurt in little Barbara's heart, that hurt was healed by the old woman whose view of life became the cornerstone of Barbara's own. And for years, Dodie remained in the family's employ, loving the youngsters in wondrous ways that their parents could not. And then when Barbara was a senior in high school, beloved Dodie died. And yet, even still, these many years later, in the quiet hours away from the cacophony of a busy life, Barbara will sometimes sit and recall the warmth of a wrinkled hand or a particular smile or a sweet story told once upon a morning or a whispered bedtime prayer, all of them Dodie's, each of them Dodie's. And then do the other memories, the bitter ones, fade and die in the light of an unexpected love still held dear by Jacqueline's little sister, the little sister whom you know as journalist Barbara Walters. Only now you know the rest of the story.
And now, the rest of the story. The warmth of a wrinkled hand. Now that's a good line. You know, I have vivid memories of watching Barbara Walters' investigative reporting on television. I can still hear her saying in an accent that seemed alien to me with my southern drawl, "I'm Barbara Walters and this is 2020. Bad impersonation, I know. Barbara Walters was born in Boston in September 1929. She was the granddaughter of Russian Jewish immigrants. Her paternal grandfather, Abraham Voromwasser, was born in Poland and immigrated to England. He anglicized his name to Walters. In 1909, Barbara's father Lou and two of his brothers immigrated to the United States. By the 1930s, Lou owned half interest in the Latin Quarter nightclub in Boston, Massachusetts. The Walters family moved to New York City, where they lived in a penthouse on Central Park West. Wow, upscale. From 1939 until 1950s, the Walters family moved back and forth between New York City and Miami, Florida. In 1942, Lou opened the famous Latin Quarter in New York City, which featured artists such as Frank Sinatra, Ella Fitzgerald, the Andrews Sisters, the Carter Family, and many, many more. In 1943, Lou produced the Ziegfeld Follies of 1943 on Broadway. He was the entertainment director for the Tropicana Resort and Casino in Las Vegas. He also worked as a booking agent. Young Barbara was regularly in the company of celebrities. She later said that being around so many celebrities when she was young kept her from being in awe of them. Barbara's father's luck in the entertainment business was sometimes really good, other times really bad. When Barbara was still a child, her father's finances got so bad that he lost his nightclubs. Barbara said he had a breakdown. He went down to live in our house in Florida, and then the government took the house, and then they took the car, and they took the furniture. With nowhere else to go, Lou moved his family in with his friend, mobster Bill Dwyer, in Miami. In 1951, Barbara earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in English from Sarah Lawrence College in New York. After college, she took a job at a small advertising agency where she handled publicity and wrote press releases. 2 years later, she produced a children's show called Ask the Camera. That led to work in several other television productions, during which time Barbara also wrote for Redbook magazine. In 1955, she became a writer on The Morning Show on CBS. In 1961, she became a researcher and writer for NBC's The Today Show. She was eventually promoted to the show's regular Today Girl, where she handled light news and the weather. Now, Barbara referred to the Today Girls as tea pourers. They were there to look good and fill in between real news. Barbara said later that in the 1960s, the belief was that no one would take a woman seriously reporting hard news. But Barbara was determined not to be just a tea pourer. Barbara worked hard in a field dominated by men. From 1971 to 76, she was the moderator on the half-hour TV show on NBC called Not for Women Only. Her show immediately followed the Today Show, which she was still a part of. The title of the show gives us an idea of just how hard Barbara was fighting to change the viewer's perception of women on TV. You see, the original title of the show that ran until Barbara Walters took over was For Women Only. She had them change the name to Not for Women Only. The original show featured a panel of intellectuals and academics who discussed topics considered to be women's issues, such as birth control, abortion, and the generation gap. But when Barbara took over, she widened the range of topics and did away with the panel setup in favor of more audience involvement. Her show featured members of the public who asked, as she later said, questions the folks watching at home would most want asked. When ratings began to slip, according to Barbara, we did a program that dealt with some aspect of sex. Sex always sells. Some of her notable guests included Mamie Eisenhower and Barbara Bush. Sometimes her good friend Hugh Downs acted as co-moderator. In the same year Barbara became the moderator of Not for Women Only, Frank McGee was offered the position of host of The Today Show. But he agreed with one stipulation. If he and Barbara were ever doing a joint interview, he was to ask the first 3 questions. Those were the ones that most people remembered. When Frank McGee died in 1974, NBC officially designated Barbara Walters as the program's first female co-host. She was the first female co-host of any news program in the United States. Unbelievable. In 1976, ABC had made Barbara an offer she couldn't refuse. A 5-year, $5 million contract to co-anchor the ABC Evening News. This deal made her the highest paid news anchor in the country, male or female. And she became the first female primetime network news anchor in the country. In that same year, she began her primetime Barbara Walters Specials program, on which she interviewed world leaders, including numerous presidents of the United States, Cuban Fidel Castro, British prime ministers, and other notable people such as Michael Jackson, Bing Crosby, Katharine Hepburn. Katharine Hepburn did not like giving interviews, and it took years for Barbara to secure an interview with Katharine Hepburn. Before she agreed to be interviewed, she asked to meet with Barbara. Barbara went to Hepburn's home and was led to a staircase. Barbara looked up at Katharine and smiled. Katharine barked, "You're late. Have you brought me chocolates?" Barbara had not. She was unaware that she was supposed to bring chocolates. After their initial meeting, Katharine agreed to the interview. Barbara interviewed Katharine Hepburn on many occasions, and each time she brought chocolates. In 1979, Barbara became a correspondent on the ABC News magazine 2020 with Hugh Downs. Now remember, Hugh Downs and Barbara Walters were good friends. There was none of the hostility between them that had been there with other male news anchors. In 1984, she became Hugh Downs' co-host on 2020. She worked as co-host of 2020 until she retired from the program 20 years later, 2004. In August 1997, The View premiered with Barbara Walters as executive producer and co-host. In May 2014, Barbara retired as regular co-host of The View, but appeared as a guest host several times in late 2014 and 2015. In December 2015, she held her last on-air interview, in which she interviewed Donald Trump for ABC News. 93-year-old Barbara Walters died at her home in Manhattan on December the 30th, 2022. She had been suffering from dementia. Her last words were etched into her gravestone. "No regrets. I had a great life." Barbara Walters paved the way for female journalists, including Diane Sawyer, Nora O'Donnell, Erin Burnett, Robin Roberts, Megyn Kelly, Connie Chung, and so many more that we're familiar with. She fought her way to the top and refused to be a tea pourer. She reshaped journalistic television. Barbara Walters is just one example of how a single person can make a big change in our world. We too are capable of changing our world for the better. Don't you think? I'm Brad Dison. Thanks for watching. And now you know the rest of the story.